My presentation?
Yes.
Wonderful. So are we doing the refresher or is that what people are wanting? Yes. Okay. Okay, welcome everyone. I am Megan Gill, and this is our presentation, a primer on the immigration, refugee, and settlement processes. Um, I hope you all enjoy this presentation. I know I have only been kind of immersed in this sector for a little over a year. So for me, there was a lot of good information and learning. And I was very thankful for Radhika as my co-presenter because as many of you know, she's been in the sector for a long time and worked for ISC. So I think that's where a lot of people know her from as well. So yeah, like I hope you enjoy this session. I found it very informative learning about the history of Canadian immigration and all of the different immigration categories. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. But first, I'm going to take us through a land acknowledgement. So although we do land acknowledgements before every presentation, I think its relation to this presentation in particular is pretty significant because we are talking about the history of this land that we call Canada. So a part of that history is that Canada has been a safe place where people can come and work to create a life that wouldn't have been possible in their home countries. But another part of it is how colonization impacted this land and the Indigenous people that have lived here for tens of thousands of years before any type of formal immigration happened. So Leroy Little Bear talks about how all living things are alive, have a spirit. And if we stop to notice, we'll see patterns and cycles where the interconnectedness between all living things can be observed. And Indigenous people, they really understand this deeply, knowing that the earth literally is our mother, who we have to understand and respect if we would like her to continue producing what we as humans need to survive. So as I take you through the first part of this presentation, you'll see how this philosophy was not understood or adopted by many of the early settlers that came to this country. As the mainstream mindset was really focused on claiming and owning land, extracting resources, and cultural assimilation. So, in many ways, that is still happening today. And that's why bringing this philosophy back to life by acknowledging the land and the Indigenous people that have lived interconnected with this land, it's not only respectful, but I feel like it's a requirement for humans and the earth to find that balance again. So with that, I'll take you into our formal land acknowledgement. Immigrant Services Calgary's head office is located on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy and the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Okay, so this is our agenda for today. So I'll quickly take us through a Gateway and Knowledge Hub refresher and then get into the history of Canadian immigration. So the history will be a bit of a lecture style. But after that, Radhika is going to take us through an icebreaker, the immigration categories and challenges faced by immigrants. And she will ask for participant involvement just in answering some questions, either by raising their hand or and going off mic, and or they can also type in the chat. And then at the end, we're going to finish off with some case studies of some things that you might come across working in the sector. And we're hoping that some of the information that you got from the session today or previous information that you have can help you to kind of work through some of the questions we have in relation to these case studies. Um, So here's the reminder about Newcomer Knowledge Hub. So basically what happens is a newcomer family arrives and they're looking for guidance. Or sorry, this is Gateway, not Newcomer Knowledge Hub. But they're looking for guidance around their journey, and they're connected with a gateway planner who works with them and co-creates a personalized plan based on their needs and their strengths. The personalized plan is presented to the family, and consents gathered to reach out to the referrals. And so the gateway planners, they connect people with all types of resources in the community, primary support programs, gateway partners, and then even non-affiliated agencies. So that is how Gateway works. And then the Newcomer Knowledge Hub, basically that process that's carried out by Gateway, it generates a large amount of data. And what we know is that data means valuable information that could be used to better inform the settlement sector. So through the Newcomer Knowledge Hub, we're creating a repository for aggregated and de-identified newcomer data, which is basically just a place for organized de-identified data to store, where we plan to utilize it to produce like new knowledge and valuable information about the settlement journeys of newcomers. Our intention with this is to use the data to create information and knowledge that will hold value for researchers, educators, policymakers, funders, donors, investors, and practitioners to improve not just the gateway system, but the larger southern but inform the larger Alberta, southern Alberta settlement sector. And the intent is to understand how we can all continue to improve our ability to better serve newcomers. So there is your refresher. Now I'm going to move into the actual presentation. And so I am going to start with the history of Canadian immigration. And my first slide is talking about the Bering Strait Land Bridge. And so when I first envisioned this land bridge, I, for some reason, thought it was attaching like Eastern Canada to Western Europe. But when I started to look at pictures, it didn't. It connected northwestern Canada and northern and western Alaska with northeastern Russia. So if you think about that as a migration route for like the prehistoric ancestors of our Indigenous people, our Canadian Indigenous people, I feel like that route was fairly treacherous to get to this land. And researchers believe that the Bering Strait Land Bridge appeared at different points throughout history when sea levels were low due to seawater being frozen up in glaciers. So you can see on the slide there, those red arrows show the possible migration routes of Canada's first migrants. And so when we say that the Indigenous people of Canada have been here for time immemorial, they really have. And then really the only people who set foot on this land before European settlers came was the Vikings, who would at times land on Eastern Canada, just as kind of taking breaks and during voyages. So they did set foot on this land, but until Europeans came, no one else really did. So the next people to migrate to Canada did so approximately 400 years ago, landing in what we now know as Eastern Canada, but was then called New France because it was the French people that arrived there via ship. These people began creating and overseeing the initial Canadian colonies. The British did join soon after. However, what happened was both the French and British homeland governments were unprepared to commit to putting large amounts of money or energy into encouraging the further settlement of New France. And so the growth of the colonies at that time was quite slow. But then during the late 1700s, France and Britain's interest in guaranteeing they had the power to claim Canadian land and exploit Canadian natural resources grew. So with this as a driving force, the colonies also began to grow. And New France's population in 1760, increased to about 65,000. And it was first due to Scottish refugees who were soldiers sent to New France after the 7-Year War because they were no longer welcomed in their homelands. But then soon after, the population was supplemented by German and Swiss settlers. And then in the late 1700s, Irish settlers grew the population even more. So the next larger group of people to come to this land was during the American Revolution, where loyalists, who were the people that were living in the American British colonies that remained loyal to Britain during and after the Civil War, they came. So they consisted mainly of white English-speaking Protestants, and many of them fled to Canada as political refugees because they didn't feel safe to stay in America after they had publicly displayed their loyalty to Britain. So there were also just over 3,000 African American loyalists that fled to Canada and settled in Nova Scotia area. And some gained their freedom from slavery by fighting under the British Crown during the Civil War. However, most were still enslaved, and they were brought to Canada as stolen property due to the war or as property of the white loyalists. And by the 1790s, the number of enslaved Black people that were in what we now know as Nova Scotia was about 2,000. Okay, and then the Irish were the next large group of people to come over to this land. And so in the mid 1800s, there was a large increase in Irish people immigrating to Canada due to the Irish potato famine, as well as there was a series of European rebellions that were going on at the time that people were fleeing from. So basically these Irish people, they had some differences from the majority of the European immigrants that were currently in Canada, which included their religion because they were Roman Catholic, they weren't Anglo-Saxon. Their loyalty, as they didn't have that same sense of loyalty to Britain that the current people living in Canada did. And then also, many of them avoided farming as they associated it with poverty because that was their experience in Ireland and the reason why many of them fled to Canada. But what ended up happening was avoiding farming in Canada pushed them into further poverty because Canadian farming was prosperous. And so basically these differences from the dominant Canadian demographic at the time created a discriminatory separation between the two groups, which resulted in many Irish people choosing to live in communities together versus integrating into the current mainstream Euro-Canadian culture. The next focus of major settlement of this land was settling Western Canada. So basically during Canadian Confederation, which was the time when Canadian lands were being established and provinces were being created, Canada's first Prime Minister, who was John A. Macdonald, wanted to ensure that Western land in Canada was claimed as Canadian, as there was worry around Americans scooping it up. So their solution was to increase immigration to populate the West, and they were specifically interested in having white European farmers be the people to do this. So they initiated advertising campaigns with messages like those you see up on the slide there. And they also offered something called the homestead grants, which were essentially free land to those who qualified as long as they stayed on the land for 3 years, built a home, and cultivated a portion of the land. Um, So it's really important to note that at this time of Confederation and pushing Western Canadian immigration, the government first had to introduce tactics to formally remove Indigenous people from their ancestral lands to make way for this new white Canada that they were envisioning. And although this had already been happening in the East, increased measures were introduced. And an example of that is the Métis Land Script, which was created as a coupon or an entitlement to land for the Métis people. However, that script system, it was flawed, and it did result in the systematic loss of land for the Métis people. So the script handouts were advertised in newspapers and posters, and it was believed that the purpose of the advertisements was to alert speculators. And then what would happen was the land speculators would buy up the scripts from the Métis people at very low prices and then sell it to the main chartered banks in Canada. So out of 14,000 land scripts that were issued, land speculators ended up obtaining over 12,000 of them. And there was also no protection against fraud. So many Métis people had their names forged without their knowledge. And this pushed Indigenous people into the government created reservation lands. Um, And then residential schools were also created to assimilate Canadian Indigenous children into this new Canada that the government was envisioning. So this is really how the cultural genocide of Canadian Indigenous people was initiated and carried out. And we all know that the impacts of these historical atrocities continue to live on to this day. So Canadian immigration policies continued to work hard to ensure that only white people were able to immigrate to Canada back then. But there was a short period of time in the like early mid 1900s where Canada, they did decide to let some racially and ethnically diverse migrants into the country due to economic struggles caused by the Great Depression. However, they only did so reluctantly, and soon enough, restrictive immigration policies were put in place, again, to stop immigration along ethnic and racial lines. And so examples of racial and ethnic driven Canadian immigration restrictions are on the slide there. So one example is the Chinese head tax. So Chinese immigrants had to pay $500, which was a lot, to be able to migrate to Canada. Barring Black Americans using the Medical Act. So Border Patrol was told to mark all Black Americans trying to immigrate to Canada as medically unfit to migrate. Refusing World War II Jewish and German refugees. So the federal cabinet and immigration policymakers reacted with alarm to any pressure to accept Jewish or political refugees trying to escape Germany due to fear of association. And then the Japanese detention camps, which came after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And what happened was Canadian RCMP, they pushed Japanese Canadians out of their homes and were held in detention camps until the end of World War II. So as World War II came to an end, Canada became an urban industrial power, and many post-war immigrants soon filled jobs in the manufacturing and construction sectors because now, unlike immigration from the previous decades, post-war immigration was not streamed exclusively into agriculture. And then at the same time, what happened was previous generations of Canadian immigrants started to feel like they had a voice for this country that they've been living in and that they supported during World War II. And really, they began protesting unfair immigration laws. They spoke up against ethnic and racial discrimination, supported racially and ethnically diverse immigration, and demanded human rights reform. This pushed the government to gradually eliminate racial, religious, and ethnic barriers to Canadian immigration. And by the late 1960s, obvious racial discrimination and immigration policy was gone from the Canadian immigration legislation and regulations. And what this did was it opened Canada's doors to many of those who would previously have been rejected as being undesirable on the basis of race or ethnicity. So in 1971, for the first time in Canadian history, the majority of those immigrating to Canada were of non-European ancestry, and this has been this has been the case ever since, every year since. Next, the government created a point system to determine Canadian immigration eligibility, and that system is still in use today. So under this system, each applicant was awarded points for age, education, ability to speak English or French, and demand for that particular applicant's job skills. And then if applicants they were in good health or had good character, in addition to scoring enough points, they were granted admission with their spouses and dependent children. And those that didn't score enough points, they were denied. More recently, Canada has modified its procedures to give preference to the admission of independent, skilled, and immediately employable immigrants. Then we had the creation of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act as a direct consequence of the 9/11 events. So Canada deemed terrorist threats and security issues and as an urgent priority at that time. Therefore, what happened was policymakers quickly tightened their Canadian immigration regulations. In 2002, the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act was passed, and the new law was replaced um, that new law replaced the 1976 Immigration Act. And basically it made immigration to Canada harder. So this policy led to Canada's harsh stance on refugee migration, and this was reflected on how it treated Tamil asylum seekers in 2009 and 2010, as they were seen as bogus refugees, even though many of them were imprisoned despite being legitimate. But by 2015, Canada was getting back to settling refugees when 54,000 Syrian refugees were permitted into the country. And while this number was greater than the US, Canada's contribution did pale in comparison to that of other countries like Germany, Lebanon, Turkey, and Sweden. And then that takes us to today, modern day Canadian immigration. So today, Canada welcomes over 500,000 newcomers per year. Roughly 20% of the current Canadian population was born outside of Canada. And during the 2021 census, Canada had the highest portion of immigrants among G7 countries. So that's the history. And now Radhika is going to take you into our immigration categories. But first, she's going to start with a few questions and an icebreaker.
Okay, so do you want to go on to the next slide? Yeah. So thank you, Megan, for that short history of immigration to Canada. Okay, so before we go on to the immigration categories, let's first understand, when we say a person is an immigrant, what do we mean by that, right? So Oxford English Dictionary says that an immigrant is a person who comes to settle down permanently in another country. So which means that if I'm visiting Canada, or if I'm just transiting through, or I'm here just for a short period of time, I will not be considered as an immigrant. So my intention should be to settle down permanently in Canada. Okay. So by a show of hands, or feel free to unmute yourselves and talk to, how many of you are immigrants here? It's a moot question. It's a moot question, I know. Most of us are immigrants, right? Okay. And do you know which immigration category that you arrived under? Anyone, feel free to unmute yourselves.
Skilled worker.
Yes.
Yeah, skilled worker.
Most of them. Okay.
Yeah.
I came as a student.
Student. Yes. Student.
I came as independent.
Independent. Yes. So there are so many categories, right? So let's have a look at that. Okay. Can we go on to the next slide? Yeah. So now that we've all established that many of us are immigrants here, why did we immigrate to Canada? So you know what, I'll go first. So I actually came here because my husband got a job here. Okay, so we came on a work permit. And then because we had been in a number of countries in Europe and we never settled there, we did not even plan to settle down in Canada in the first place. But when we came here, we really liked it. The kids loved the school. We loved the diversity. We liked the weather too. The snow for the first year was absolutely fantastic. And then, yes, from next year's, I wasn't so enamored of the snow. But still, so we applied for permanent residency. And because we were here, we got it very quickly. So for me, my reason for immigration was everything except for the first one. So people do come here for a variety of reasons. So many of them, especially refugee claimants and refugees, they come here to escape political unrest, war, persecution in their country. Many of us came for better quality of life, for children's education, for a stable economy, because this is a multicultural and diverse society. And then healthcare. Healthcare is a big, big attractive point in Canada. The universal healthcare, the free healthcare, and of course the high quality of education too. So apart from this, there are many other reasons too, but these are mainly most of the common reasons that people do immigrate to Canada. Okay. Now, just because somebody wants to come to Canada, can they just walk in? No, they cannot, right? There is a process for this. And what is a process? It is a Canadian government who decides who they want to let into the country. Okay? And how do they decide that? So every year, the government of Canada, they have targets for each immigration category. So the main four immigration categories that they consider are the economic immigration, so the economic contribution, so who can contribute to the economy of Canada. So the the previous slide, yes. The economic contribution, and then is the family reunification, and then is the refugees and the humanitarian applications. So these are the categories that for which that they establish targets. So they have the federal government comes up with a target on their own, but they do then consult the provincial governments, the municipal governments, and other organizations before they set this. And once they have this in place, the Minister of Immigration then presents it in the Parliament each year. And then they have discussions and they come up with the established targets for each category. So economic contribution category is the highest. So they have approximately around 60% that they assigned for the economic contribution category. The family reunification is around 25-ish%, and refugees and humanitarian is approximately around 15%. So in 2024, this year, Canada plans to allow 485,000 permanent residents. But from next year on, beginning from 2025 and 2026, they want to keep it at a stable rate of 500,000 permanent residents per year. Okay. So now let's look at the immigration categories.
Radhika, just before you continue, I wanted to address the hands that are up in the chat,
I'm sorry,
just
I
in
couldn't see
case
that.
someone had questions. So I just wanted to
Sure.
ask Jaya, did you have a question or some feedback to share?
I am so sorry if my hand is still up. I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, I just wanted to ensure all the questions are addressed.
Thank
so
you.
if you have a question, we can address that right now.
Is it still up?
No, it went down.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. Haroon, did you have a question? Denise, Lonimi, did you have a question? Or you could just put your hand back down.
Sorry, I don't
It's all good. Oh, it's okay. Thank you. I guess there's no questions. You can continue.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry, I did not see that. I'll keep a lookout for that. Thank you. Okay, so next we go on to the immigration categories. Okay, so this is in no particular order. Okay, so first is that I'm going to talk about is the provincial nominee program. Okay, so what is a provincial nominee program? So this is a program that has been designed for each province. Okay, so under this program, each province gets to decide who they want to admit into the province as an immigrant. So the province chooses the people who have the necessary skills, the necessary work experience, the education, the language ability, and who can effectively contribute to the economy of their province. They set so the categories can be quite different. So they will fix how many students they want to admit in, how many business people, how many skilled workers, how many semi-skilled workers, and so on. Okay. So usually people apply for the provincial nominee program because they do want to settle in that province. However, just because they decide to apply into that province, there is no requirement for them to stay in that province. Okay, so if they can come in here, the next day they decide they don't want to stay in Alberta, they're free to move around. There is no problem. The only provinces that do not have the provincial nominee program is Nunavut, because it's a territory and it's special, and the other one is Quebec. Quebec doesn't have a provincial nominee program because they have their own immigration category. Okay. Oh, there was a hands up. It's gone down. Okay, thank you.
Oh, I see the hand up there. Liana, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry, a very quick question, Radhika. Do you know if, let's say, the 485,000 that are then distributed amongst the provinces, do the provinces actually declare somewhere the number, the number of intended kind of permanent residents in their province?
So if you look, if you can go to the province, so for example, QuebecImmigration.ca. So all these provinces, I'm sure they have it somewhere there, but I'm really not sure if they have a list of how many per province. Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And about the PNP, do you know if for the provincial nominee program, again, do they announce like a maximum number or an indication of how many people they intend to?
I'm sorry, I do not know that, but we can always look at the website. I'll have a look and then I can email you
Thank you.
if that works. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So the next one is the Quebec immigration. Okay. So Quebec immigration, as we said, Quebec is very special because they have a separate immigration program. So they get to decide their targets, they get to decide the categories and so on. Okay. And that is mainly for the economic migrants, immigrants though. Okay. So family reunification and in Canada, asylum seekers are always let in on an ongoing basis. So there is no target set for those categories. It's only for the economic immigrants. However, saying this, we have to say that Quebec in the last year actually admitted 3 times more refugee claimants in Canada, refugee claimants, than any other province. Okay, so they had around 60,000 asylum seekers last year, which is actually 3 times more than all the other provinces in Canada. Now, Quebec immigration is very unique, like I said. Okay, why? Because before a person can apply to be an immigrant, to immigrate to Quebec, they have to undergo what is called the Quebec Values Test. Okay, so there is a test that they have to undergo, and they have to get 75% on that test. Okay. If they don't, they can always redo the test, or they have to undergo a Quebec's values course, because Quebec really wants to preserve its cultural values, so it's important for them that the immigrants really understand and adhere to their values. Right? And once they pass that test, they get what is called a Quebec selection certificate. And on the basis of that certificate, they can then apply to become a permanent resident. So this is applicable for skilled workers, business professionals, investors, entrepreneurs, and so on. Family reunification. This is not applicable for family unification. So if somebody, an immigrant, wants to bring in, sponsor a family member, the family member does not have to undergo this, and it is not applicable for refugee claimants either. Next, we come to the Atlantic Immigration Program. Okay. So like we said, there are provincial nominee programs. Now, Atlantic Canada has a special program called the Atlantic Immigration Program. And that's for the 4 Atlantic provinces of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Now, this is also a bit unique than the other provincial nominee programs. The reason is employers, they can recruit the people that they feel they need to fill in their positions, and they do not have to give a labor market impact assessment under this program. They are exempt from this. Okay, so that's a huge attractive point of this program. And once the government accepts that, the person who they have chosen to apply for the permanent residence, that person can also get a temporary work permit by the time their PR is being processed. Okay, so that's the uniqueness of this program. However, there's one requirement, though, that the immigrant has to prove that they have sufficient settlement funds. So they need to prove that they have the money that they can bring in that will help them in the brief time that they are here in Canada in order to settle down. Again, this is on the points system, and I'll talk about the point system later when we come to the express entry. So the next category is express entry. Okay, so express entry is particularly for skilled workers. And there are 3 categories under the express entry. So the first one is the Canadian Experience Class. Second is the Federal Skilled Worker. And the third is the Federal Skilled Trades Program. Okay, so let's look at the Canadian Experience Class. Okay, so these are for individuals who have Canadian work experience and recent Canadian work experience, which means that they should have worked in Canada full-time for at least 12 months in the last, I think it's the last 5 years. Okay, in the last 5 years, I believe. No, sorry, last 3 years, not 5 years, last 3 years. Okay? So that is one of the requirements. And then they should prove their language ability. So it's roughly around CLB 6 or 7. Okay? That's the language requirement that's required. So if they have these, then they can apply under the Canadian Experience class. Now, the work experience has to fall under the National Occupation Classification, the NOC category. It cannot be just anything. It has to fall under the NOC category. However, if the person has been self-employed, that is not eligible. People who are self-employed, they are not eligible. And even students who are working here during their study permit are also not eligible for this. So they have to come in like maybe temporary foreign workers, caregivers, those kind of categories, they are eligible to apply. Oh, and also refugee claimants are not eligible to apply under this category. Okay. So all the information is available on the Government of Canada website. We have it in the reference list, so you can go over that. The next category under express entry is the Federal Skilled Worker Program. And I heard a lot of people who said that they came under the Federal Skilled Worker Program. Now, this is for skilled workers who are outside Canada. So they're outside Canada and they want to immigrate to Canada. Okay. And this is where they use the point system to select suitable candidates, the point system that Megan mentioned. So there are 6 categories of where they get points. So they get points for education, work experience, language ability. If they have an employment offer in Canada, that's great, and also adaptability too. And the pass mark currently is 67 out of 100. Okay? They have to get, if they have that, then they are invited to apply. So it's an invitation only program. So the government assesses, and based on those who get higher points, they can apply for the permanent resident. And this is not just for the immigrant, it is for the family too. So their spouses and dependent children can apply along with them. Okay. Then the next one is the Federal Skilled Trades Program. And this is for tradespeople. Okay, so if you have carpenters, all those occupational trades, it's for the Federal Skilled Trades Program. Now, this is different from the previous one, the skilled workers, because for this program, they need to have a valid job offer. Okay? So only those, either you have to have a valid job offer, and that job offer must, it should be at least a 12-month employment offer, at least 12-month employment offer, or they need to have an occupational certificate from one of the Canadian provinces. Then they need to have a language benchmark of CLB4 or a French language test. And they need to have work experience of at least full-time 2 years prior in the past 5 years. Okay? So these are the eligibility requirements for the Federal Skilled Workers Program. Now, both this program and the previous program, the Federal Skilled Workers Program and the Canadian Experience class, they should not settle down in Quebec. Okay? They cannot go to Quebec, any other place except Quebec. The next category that we come to is the Family Class Program. So most of you know this is a family reunification program. So this is for the immediate family members of Canadian citizens or permanent residents. Okay. So if a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident has a spouse or a common law partner, conjugal partner, dependent children, parents, grandparents, then brothers and sisters, nephews, nieces, grandchildren, provided they are orphans. Okay, so brothers, sisters, nephews, nieces, grandchildren, they should be orphans. They should be under the age of 18. and they should not be married or in a common law relationship. Those are the people that they can sponsor to this. Now, there are two things to keep in mind under this category. There is something called a sponsorship agreement, and there is another requirement, which is an undertaking. So sponsorship agreement is an agreement that the sponsor and the sponsored person, they sign with the government of Canada, saying that the sponsor is responsible to take care of the sponsored person to meet all the basic requirements like food, clothing, shelter, household expenses, etc., for up to 3 years from the date that they become a permanent resident. So that's a sponsorship agreement. And the sponsored person agrees that they will do everything in their power to support themselves too. Okay? So that's what is called a sponsorship agreement. Now, there's another thing called an undertaking. So an undertaking is an agreement between the sponsor and the Canadian government, where the sponsor says that the person who I have sponsored will not need to apply for any social assistance during this sponsorship period of 3 years. And in case the sponsored person does apply, then the sponsor is responsible to pay back those expenses to the government. Okay. Now, in Alberta, people don't, yes, the government does go and get the money back from the sponsored person, but not as actively as in Ontario. Now, Ontario, they're quite aggressive. They have a special unit for it, and they do aggressively go after the sponsors if the sponsored person does accept social assistance. So even if the sponsor loses their job, they are not in a position to support the sponsored persons, they are still liable to pay the government back. There's a lot of issue going on because of that. You can read, there are a number of case studies, newspaper articles about this, where they have the sponsored person, sponsored people have come together, they have applied to the Supreme Court of Canada saying that they cannot pay it back. But so far, the verdict has not been in favor of the person sponsoring. Okay? So this is quite serious. So for spouse and conjugal partners, the undertaking is, and the sponsorship period is 3 years. But for dependent children who are under the age of 22, the sponsorship period is 10 years. So if I am sponsoring a dependent child who is under 22 years old, I'm responsible for that child for 10 years. So that is the family class. Then we come to the business immigration programs. Okay.
Could I quickly ask a question on the family class? I'm so sorry.
Yes, please. Tiana? Oh, sorry.
It's Jessica.
Oh, Jessica, yes.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to double check because you mentioned that that for 3 years from the date of receiving PR that the sponsor is responsible. Does that mean that when a family member comes to Canada, as soon as upon arrival they receive that PR status? Okay, so they don't have a transition.
No, so from the time they arrive in Canada and they get that stamped, from that date on.
Thank you.
Oh, and I see a question in the chat from Rashmi. How about parents? I'll come to the parents, okay? So I do have a slide on the grandparent and grandparent sponsorship. I'll come to that.
Okay,
We have another question from Tiana.
Oh, sorry, didn't see that.
Yes, that's okay. So the sponsorship agreement can be up to 3 years. So it doesn't have to be 3 years, right? This can be shorter.
It's right now, it is 3 years. It is not less than 3 years.
Okay.
It is 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about?
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot to mention that. So if a sponsorship breaks down due to violence, family violence or abuse, then the sponsored immigrant is eligible for social assistance. But again, the the office, let's say if it's the income support in Alberta, they're giving the social assistance, they can claim it from the person sponsoring. So they do go after the sponsor.
Just one more thing about the sponsored person. What about their medical expenses, health expenses?
Oh, okay, because they come in as a permanent resident, they are eligible for the provincial health insurance plan. So if it's in Alberta, they're eligible for the Alberta health insurance plan. The health is covered.
But they would need another plan
for dental and all of that. Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So where was I? The family class. Okay. Next, we come to the business immigration program. Yeah. So business immigration program. I'm just going to skim through this. Okay. So there are two categories here. One is a startup visa program, and the other is self-employed. Okay. So startup visa program is for individuals and a group of up to 5 business owners. Okay. They can get together, they can start a business, and they can apply for a startup visa program. But of course, there are requirements that the business has to be something that's on the list of the Canadian government. They need to have letters of support, they need to meet language requirements, and they have to have enough settlement funds to settle in Canada. Okay. Again, all this information is on the Government of Canada website. It's quite detailed, and you can go and read about it. A self-employed individual is a person who can immigrate here if they have the intention and the ability to start an employment in cultural activities or in athletics. Okay? It's cultural and athletics, nothing else. And the eligibility requirement is that they should have experience in this, in cultural activities or athletics on a world-class level. Okay? So just because I danced in my school program, it's not a cultural activity. I cannot apply as a self-employed individual. I have to be an Olympic level athlete, okay? Or somebody who's very famous world over. So I have to have done this on a world-class level in order to apply for this. Okay. Okay, so next, then we come on to the parents and grandparents. So Rashmi, this is where, this is the one that you wanted, okay?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so just a second, please. Okay, so parents and grandparents, okay? Now, this is, again, for Canadian citizens and permanent residents to sponsor their parents and grandparents to immigrate to Canada. Now, there is, just like for the family class, for this one too, there is an income requirement that you have to have a minimum level of income in order to sponsor parents and grandparents. Okay? This is a lottery system. So in January of every year, the application opens, you have a certain window to put in the application, and then they have a number, they have a specific limit on the number of applications that they will accept. Okay? So it's always a rush to put in the application for this. Now, in this class, the sponsor is responsible to look after the parents and grandparents for 20 years. So the undertaking is 20 years. Unlike the family class where it is 3 years, which means that the parent or grandparent coming in, they are not eligible for any government benefits, including old age pensions, guaranteed income supplements, nothing of that. Social assistance, no, nothing of that for 20 years from the day they become a permanent resident. However, they do after 3 months, they are, of course, they can get the Alberta or the provincial health insurance plan. They're also eligible for the provincial plans, like, Alberta has seniors benefits, like the special needs assistance and Alberta seniors benefits. They're eligible for that after 3 months, but not any of the federal support. They're not eligible for income support, nothing of that sort. The sponsors have to pledge that. Okay. And
there's a few, sorry, Radhika, there are a few questions in the chat. If you don't mind, we can just address those and go on.
Sure. Yes, it was before it was 10 years. It became 20 years a couple of years before because I worked in the seniors program. Even 10 years was too much. And I was actually a part of the elder abuse, addressal committee. And we had actually lobbied to bring that down. But unfortunately, instead of bringing it down, the Canadian government increased it to 20 years. Okay. So,
Can I
So-
ask a little bit?
yes.
I'm Rashmi here. Yeah,
Yes.
I work with seniors with CCIS as well. So, do you have tentative year since like which year was that implemented? Like I know that
I
when my
believe
parents
it
came,
was-
it was just 10 years.
It was 10 years, yeah.
Yeah.
It has been a couple of years. At least 5 years now. I think it was 2019, I believe. It was before COVID, definitely before COVID.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, they can work during this period because they are permanent residents, right? They can definitely work. They can get the health plan, the provincial health plan. They can definitely do that. It's just that they will not get any of the government benefits. That's all. Right? No government benefits. So we've had cases because I used to work in the seniors program, and we had cases where really bad cases of elder abuse. I've personally taken clients to Alberta Income Support Program, saying that they need to break away from this. But what the caseworkers told me was they are okay to give income support to them, but they will definitely call the sponsor, who is usually the abuser, and ask them if they would be willing to pay back the money that they give to their seniors, which completely defeats the purpose, right? Unfortunately, there is no workaround around this. We have the elder abuse response team. Okay, Kirby Center has that. If you do come across cases, and this is for Rashmi, if you do come across cases of elder abuse, you can definitely contact them. But from my experience in working with them, they do interfere where there's financial abuse and where there's physical abuse too. But emotional abuse and all of that, it cannot be proven, right? Unless the parent or the grandparent is willing to break the sponsorship. If there's physical abuse, definitely they will interfere. They will do that. So you can always contact the Elder Abuse Response Team at Kirby Center if you do have questions on that. Okay. So then we come to the refugee protection programs, and we have Megan.
Yes. Denise, did you have a question that you wanted answered before I move on to the next section?
It's okay. You can move on.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Okay, so now we're going to move into the Refugee Protection Program, and within it, there's 6 streams. And so I think the most familiar people are, the streams that people are most familiar with are the first 2, the government assisted refugee program and the private sponsorship of refugee program. But there's also the blended visa office referred program, the joint assistance program, the Rainbow Refugee Assistance Partnership, and the In Canada Asylum Program. So a GAR is a person who is outside Canada has been determined to be a convention refugee, which is an individual who fears persecution based on their race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. Now, this fear must be so severe that they're unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin. GARs are selected from applicants referred by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and other referral organizations. They receive financial and other support from the Government of Canada or Province of Quebec for up to 1 year after their arrival in Canada for things like accommodation, clothing, and food. After that year, they are eligible for provincial support if needed. And after they arrive in Alberta, GARs will receive temporary accommodations at one of the 5 federally funded refugee reception centers that are located in Edmonton, Calgary, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, and Red Deer. The next stream, Radhika is going to talk about the next stream.
So the next stream is the private sponsorship of refugees, and commonly referred to as the PSRs. So these refugees are brought in by private organizations or private individuals. So there are 3 ways that private sponsored refugees come in. So one is through the sponsorship agreement holders. So who are these sponsorship agreement holders? So they're usually organizations, okay, and who have signed an agreement with the Minister of Immigration. Okay, so it's an organization who have a formal agreement with the Minister of Immigration to bring in refugees. And they usually have a certain number of refugees or refugee families that they can bring in every year. That's one way that private refugees come in. The second way is groups of 5. So groups of 5 can be an organization or an association or even individuals, right? Up to five people who come together and agree that we want to sponsor a refugee. They then make a formal application to the government of Canada and in order to sponsor a refugee to come in. And the third one are community sponsors. So community sponsors can be any Canadian organization or an association or a corporation that is based in the community that the refugee lives in. And again, they can make an application to the Canadian government. So the last 2, the groups of 5 and the community sponsors, they're ad hoc. So they're not an ongoing, it's not an ongoing sponsorship of private refugees. They just can come together on an ad hoc basis and decide if they want to do it and then go ahead and put in the application. Now, the private sponsored refugees who come in, they will not be supported by the government of Canada. So the persons or the organizations sponsoring them are responsible for taking care of these refugees for 1 year. So financially, helping them settle down, providing them the emotional support, finding them a place to live, everything has to be taken up by the sponsors. And they do sign an agreement with the government for that. But after a year, if the privately sponsored refugees do need government assistance, they are absolutely eligible to apply for income support programs and all of that. And when these private sponsored refugees come in, they are eligible for the provincial healthcare plan too. The next one is the blended visa office, and Megan will talk about that.
So this program, it matches community members with a BVOR refugee in urgent need for resettlement to Canada. So the Canadian government provides up to 6 months of financial support through the Resettlement Assistance Program, while sponsors would provide the remaining 6 months of support. And sponsors provide newcomers with a sense of community and with much needed emotional, social, and other supports that help to break the isolation of settling into a completely new country and often a new culture alone. The next is the Joint Assistance Program. So the government and a private sponsor support these refugees. IRCC collaborates with sponsorship agreement holders to provide assistance to resettled refugees. So the JAP program is specifically designed for refugees who have special needs and require additional support with settling in Canada. The government is responsible for covering the initial costs and providing financial support for the first 24 to 36 months after the refugees arrive. The sponsorship group gives them settlement help and emotional support as well. The next one is the Rainbow Refugee Assistance Partnership. So this is an initiative designed to provide resettlement assistance to refugees who self-identify as members of the LGBTQIA+ community. The program is aimed at supporting those who are fleeing violence and persecution in their home countries. So IRCC collaborates with the sponsorship agreement holders to provide assistance to these refugees. And the government covers the startup costs and provides 3 months of financial support. And the sponsoring group is responsible for providing the remaining 9 months of financial support and social support throughout the entire sponsorship process. Oops. And then finally, we have the In Canada asylum program. So individuals who are currently in Canada or arrive at a Canadian point of entry may apply for refugee protection by submitting a refugee claim to the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. Until a decision is made by the IRB, they are referred to as refugee claimants and are not entitled to any government benefits, including healthcare. A refugee claimant can get a work or study permit while awaiting a decision. So I explained earlier what a convention refugee is, but a person in need of protection is an individual who faces the prospect of torture, risk to their life, or risk of cruel and unusual treatment or punishment if they're forced to return to their home country.
So next we have Haroon has a question.
Yes, sorry. Just can you go back to the previous slide? Okay, while they're until the decision is not made and they are recognized as a refugee claimant, what about the other non-financial supports, governmental non-financial supports? Are they entitled, like getting the health services and stuff like that?
So they are eligible for they can apply for the interim federal health program.
Okay, for the interim federal, not for the provincial health.
No, they're not eligible for the provincial health program. They can only apply for the interim federal health program. But again, that has limited and temporary health care. If I'm not mistaken, I think the Mosaic PCN clinic they have refugee clinics in Calgary. The newcomer planners at ISC will have a better idea about what services are available for refugee claimants. Okay, so next we come to the Canada. Oh, sorry. Okay, next we come to the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel Program. It's a mouthful, CUAET. And I'm sure all of the newcomer planners here already know this, but this is for the benefit of the others. Okay, so this was a special kind of a visa program for Ukrainians and their families who were escaping their country because of the Russian invasion. So this was launched in March of 2022. And this was a special kind of a visa where Ukrainians and their families could come to Canada. They could visit here, they could work here, they could study here for up to 3 years. And they also received a lot of other financial help, settlement help. They could apply for work permits too if their CUAT did not allow them for the work. And they also have a specialized channel with IRCC where all their claims is processed very quickly. And they do also have a special pathway to permanent residency. So people under this program, when they put in their application for permanent residency, it is fast-tracked because IRCC has a designated channel for these program participants. Most of their fees are also waived. They don't have to pay as much fees as the other applicants do. Again, it's all on the Canada government website, and you can find that information there. Okay.
Quick question, Radhika, from the chat.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Is there a similar program that applies to Palestinians that are fleeing the war?
Unfortunately, no. And this was one of a talking point, to put it nicely, that came up because some people felt that this was being favorable to people in Europe who were escaping persecution. And there was discussions about, again, how immigration is racialized also. So let's not go into this in here. This is not a forum for that. But no, not for any others. This is particularly for Canadian youth. But there are other programs also. I will come to that. I will. I'll give a brief idea about some other programs for other people from other countries too. Okay. So the next one we have is the temporary status categories. Okay, so we have the work permit holders. Everybody knows, right? So these are people who have come to Canada on work permits. Okay, so they are not permanent residents, but they can apply for permanent residency through any of the categories that we discussed earlier. Okay, they are temporary. They have a temporary resident status in Canada. Study permits too. So these are for international students who want to study at a Canadian institution for a course that exceeds 6 months. Okay. Now, there have been certain changes to the study permits starting 2024. Okay. First major change is that the number of study permits have been cut down, okay, by around 35%. Okay. So earlier, I think there was around 600 till last year, around 600-ish study permits that were allowed by the Canadian government, but it has now been cut down to 360 study permits, okay? Because there's a lot of demand on infrastructure, housing, health, and all of that. So the Canadian government wants to balance it, so they've cut down the number of study permits. The other changes are, some of the study permit holders, they are eligible to work for up to 20 hours while they are studying full time. So last year, this was increased. Okay, the Minister of Immigration said that they can work for more than 20 hours. He did not specify how much more. So definitely, the only thing he said was it cannot be 40 hours because they cannot work 40 hours and then study at the same time. So if they want to know by how much more they can work, they will have to go to the program that in the university and then get that information themselves. And it was supposed to end in December, but they've extended it to April the 30th of this year. So they can work for more than 20 hours. Exactly how much more, we do not know. But there is a proposal that the 20-hour limit will be increased to 30 hours. So it's being discussed by the Government of Canada. We do not know if and when they will announce that. Another change is that earlier, the students had to prove that they have $10,000 for their expenses in Canada. That has now increased to a little more than $20,000. So for all applications received after January 1st, 2024, the financial requirement is $20,000. Then we have the Super Visa program. So Super Visa program is for, again, parents and grandparents. It is actually a visitor visa, a multiple entry visitor visa, but the person coming in can stay here for up to 5 years at a stretch. Okay? So usually visitor visas are for 6 months, but here parents and grandparents. And this came about because of the lottery system for parents and grandparents. So this is to kind of placate the permanent residents here who want to bring in their parents and grandparents. So they have this 10-year multi-entry Super Visa program. But again, there are requirements here. They have to have proof of insurance, health insurance. Okay. Health insurance. No, they are not eligible for health care from the province. They have to have a private health insurance from an agency, from an insurance agent who is recognized by the Government of Canada. Okay, so Government of Canada, if you go to their website, they have a list of insurance agents that they recognize, and the insurance plan has to be purchased from the people on that list. And it has to be a minimum of $100,000. emergency coverage. It should cover healthcare, hospitalization, and repatriation. So if they need to go back to their home country, it has to cover that too. That is the healthcare requirement. It's all there in the website, the Government of Canada website. You can just go to the Parent and Super Visa program, and it's all there. Okay, then finally we come to the undocumented workers. Okay, now in addition to this, the categories that I've said, right? I've only chosen the main categories because it's already only 10 more minutes left of this. There are other immigration categories too. Like somebody was asking about the Palestinians. So there is no special category for Palestinians, but there is a category for Yazidis, resettled Yazidis, and survivors of Daesh. There is a special immigration category for them. Then there is an immigration category for Colombians, Haitians, and Venezuelans. There is another category for Hong Kong residents who are eligible Hong Kong residents who are already in Canada. And apart from this, there is an agri-food pilot project. Then there is caregivers, immigration, and all of that. All information is on the website, the Canada.government website. Okay. Then finally, we come to the undocumented immigrants. Okay, so Canada does have people who live here with no status whatsoever. We do not know how many people there are. It's estimated that there's between 300,000 to 600,000. Nobody has taken account because nobody wants to identify themselves as undocumented. Okay? Now, but the good thing about Canadian government is that they do not actively pursue undocumented workers, unlike the US and Australia and UK, who do actively go after them and deport them. Canada doesn't do that. And as you know, because they're undocumented, they're not eligible for anything. So no healthcare, nothing whatsoever from the government. They have to pay out of expenses for healthcare. But if they do go into the hospital does not ask them for the immigration status. But they have to come up with a payment plan. Okay? They have to repay the money to whichever hospital it is. Now, how can an undocumented worker become a permanent resident? The only way they can do so is through the humanitarian and compassionate grounds application. That's the only way they can become permanent residents. And that is a long process. It's quite complicated. It is quite long. We did have a client who was going through appeals and appeals for 20 years. Okay. So it's a quite lengthy process because they have to prove that they have ties to the country. So they need letters of support from family members, from the community, from their employers. It helps from children. If they have children, then from the children's schools. And they have to explain how it is going to affect them if they have to go back to their home country. But there is a means. The HNC application is one of the means that they can do this. Okay. So I hope we have
2 questions, Radhika.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'll just read them out.
Oh,
Can parents who came through the Super Visa be sponsored by their Canadian children?
Can you please confirm how long? 5 years. 5 years. Without leaving the country? 5 years at a stretch. But after 5 years, they have to go back, but they can come back in the same visa again because it's a multiple entry visa. Okay. And there was one more. Are refugee claimants undocumented? No, they are not. They are, because once their claim has been put in, they receive the official title of a refugee claimant. They can apply for work permit, they can apply for a student permit, and they can apply for the interim health benefit. So they're not undocumented. Okay. There was another question before. Can parents who came through Super Visa be sponsored by the children? Yes, they can. They can. While that sponsorship is going on, they can stay in Canada with their Super Visa. I think I've covered all the questions. Okay.
Yes, and we have Rebecca's hand up.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Hi dear, how are you? Thank you so much for the presentation. I was just wondering, so we know that the targets from IRCC are around 500,000 PRs per year, but do we know year to year how many people are in Canada with temporary visas, like either work permits or visitor?
No.
Because I heard it's in the millions, but
yeah.
And yeah, okay.
I think if you go to Statistics Canada, we might be able to get a count. Maybe StatsCan has that count.
Thank you.
Yeah. And somebody else had their hand up too. I'm sorry, I cannot see the names.
It's okay. Nicole, you can go ahead, unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to comment, Radhika. I'm not sure
Mhm.
if you've seen, because what I've been seeing in the last while is that folks, once they submit their refugee claimant,
Mhm.
when they get back that thing to say it's accepted, it is now specifically stating that they cannot engage in any form of studying.
So they've removed the
So
study permit. So it's just the work,
yeah, it's
just the
just
work
they
permit
can
now.
just do the work permit. So it's
Okay.
specifically now saying that they can't
Ah,
study, which doesn't make sense to me. But so I'm not sure
yeah.
if they would now have to reapply as an international student, and then that changes their position of what they've applied for. But that's what I've been seeing on all
That.
the refugee claims that I've been seeing. It's
Mhm.
specifically stating that you cannot engage in further education.
I see. So that's a change they've brought in. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nicole. One more question from Dua. You can unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Hi, Radhika. I just had a question. So I work
Mhm.
in a shelter setting,
Mhm.
and I was wondering, clients that come to us and their sponsor is the abuser, how, and they did leave that situation, how would their status change, or would it be in danger or anything like that?
So you're talking about the family reunification, spousal sponsor, right?
Correct.
Okay, no, their status will not be affected. Not at all.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, if they contact IRCC, they can directly contact IRCC. You can contact on their behalf and explain the situation. They can immediately get income assistance and financial assistance and all of that.
Okay, thank you.
Their status will not be affected. And that's specifically stated on the IRCC website. That breakdown due to domestic violence or abuse will never affect their status.
Thank you, Radhika.
Okay. So we just have 6 minutes. So I don't know. I had 2 case studies. I'm not sure if I can even go through a single case. Okay, you know what I will do? I'm not going to ask for a discussion because we just have 6 minutes. We'll just go through the first case study and I will tell you what I did. Okay, so if you can go through the case. Okay, so this is a case that I actually dealt with in my work. So this was, all names have been changed. So Sarah, she was an engineer from Iraq. She actually had a Canadian PhD, but she was a visitor in Canada. Okay? And she had a child who was a Canadian citizen. Now, you might wonder how this came about. Okay, so the reason is Sarah came to Canada on a student permit, okay, to do her PhD. So, but she did not want to become a permanent resident. So she went back. But while she was here on her study permit, because she was eligible for healthcare and all of that, and she became pregnant, she had the child here. So her child was a Canadian citizen. She was just on a study permit. She went back. Her husband came back here. He became a permanent resident, and he wanted to bring his family here. So he said that it takes a long time because for spousal sponsorship. Let's bring you over on a visitor visa. So she came on a visitor visa. But once she arrived here with a son, her husband became abusive, domestic violence, and he wanted to go back. So he went back, but she doesn't want to go back because some of the countries in the Middle East, they have this rule that the mother will not be given the custody of the child. It will automatically go to the father. So she doesn't want to go back because she fears that her child will be taken away. Now, when I saw this, so I would ask you the questions. So she doesn't want to go back, basically. She's on a visitor visa. How can she stay back in Canada? That was her question. So can you go to the next slide, please? So these were the questions we wanted to discuss. So since we don't have time, we only have 4 minutes, I'll just go through what I did, okay? So where can Sarah live? This was a big question for us because she was in a transition shelter. Okay, so she was first in Sheriff King, I think, shelter, and they couldn't accommodate her because of her status. So she came to a transition shelter, and that's when I was called. Right, and they couldn't accommodate her either because she had only 1 more week. She could stay only for 3 weeks. Where does she go? She cannot go. She has no way to pay rent, nothing of that sort. So what we did was, because we have connections like Rebecca and our outreach, so we have a lot of connections in the community. We got in touch with an Iraqi organization, and thankfully for her, she was quite lucky that way. We were able to find an older lady who wanted somebody to stay with her and help her in her house. So it really worked out because Sarah could go and live with this lady, and she got a place to live, and she just had to help out. So that was a happy ending for her, one thing. And then the next question was, how could she live here? Okay, so I told her, we'll connect you to an immigration lawyer who can definitely, because she's the only thing right now she can do, maybe an H&C application, right? But she was afraid because somebody had told her that because her child is a Canadian citizen, the child will be taken away by child services and she will be deported. I said that will not happen because they will take into consideration the child's mental health too. Right? So we really encouraged her to go and meet with an immigration lawyer. So we referred her to the Calgary Legal Guidance. ISC has an immigration legal clinic, and we connected her to an immigration lawyer, and I think they put in application for that, right? And then legal assistance was there, and work permit, the lawyer said he or she would try to help her get a work permit, an open work permit, and that can happen while the claim is being heard. He will try to get her an open work permit too. So this was again pre-COVID. I do not know what the status is. I hope it was, she got what she wanted. And so these are some of the, the resources. If you have cases like these, you can definitely reach out. The newcomer planners at ISC do have a host of referrals, and all of you too here, right? We come together as a community and help the new immigrants settle down. Okay, and sorry, I had another case study too, but we just cannot. Just one more minute, and sorry about that. Quickly go through the challenges. I'll just quickly go through the challenges too. Okay, so the challenges, and you all know that. First is lack of information. Like we don't know where to go to get the That's why we have settlement agencies, right? The biggest challenge that we find is lack of recognition of foreign credentials. I can be a doctor. We've had so many cases. A doctor. When I immigrate to Canada, I get points because I have a high education. But when I come here, my education is not recognized. A huge demotivating factor for immigrants. Same case with work experience, not recognized. Everybody asks for Canadian work experience. If I don't get a job in Canada, how can I have a Canadian work experience? What comes before? It's a circle, the chicken or the egg, right? Language skills. So we have people who don't have sufficient language skills, especially family class, refugee claimants and all of that. But we do have link classes and all of that. Refugee claimants, of course, cannot go in for the link classes, but we do have community organizations. They do offer language classes. If you ask around the outreach, Rebecca, she will know a lot of language classes like that. Discrimination, huge discrimination is the foreign credentials and the lack of foreign experience, the non-recognition of foreign experience, right? And integration, it takes time to integrate because you always know, like, when I came here, people would ask, like, the one thing I quickly learned is when people ask you how are you, they really don't want to know how are you. They just want you to say they're good, right? It's just a conversation starter, right? That's something that I had to learn because where I come from, when they ask how are you, actually tell them how you feel. That's not done here. So things like that, small things on how to behave, the soft skills, all that is an issue. Getting used to that is a challenge. And health and well-being too, right? Because we've left our families behind and we come here. It's an issue for us too. And for people like refugee claimants and all of those, they're not eligible for healthcare. It's a huge challenge. Okay, so I'm going to stop it at that. And Megan, do you want to close?
There's just one question in the chat from Bestra.
Yes.
Can immigration consultants represent a refugee claimant at the court?
I do not know that. I'm sorry, I really do not know that. You can ask one of the newcomer planners. They can ask one of the legal clinic immigration lawyers. Oh, and Jaya has her hand up.
I have my hand up only to say thank you. You and Megan have been so awesome. This was such a important presentation and presented so well that I'm really grateful. Thank you. And I'm glad that I'm here today and I'm grateful to be part of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jaya. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think that wraps up our presentation. Yeah, and if anyone has questions, Radhika's email and my email is on this slide, so feel free to reach out and connect. Thank you all for attending.
And Manisha, you'll share the recording of this session, right?
Yes, I'm working with Comms and K-Hub to figure out the best way to share it, and then we will have it out to all partners. I will share the first session recording and the second one as well, and the slides as well. All the information will be shared once we have a process in place. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We'll see you next month again, but I'm sure we'll see each other before then. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.